A flight attendant ripped up a 12-year-old boy's ticket without asking a single question. What she didn't realize was his father owned the entire airline. Tarek Delancey had never been on a plane by himself before. At 12, he was old enough to handle it, at least according to the airline's policy, and his dad's confidence. But that didn't stop his palms from getting a little sweaty as he clutched his boarding pass. His backpack straps were digging into his shoulders, but he didn't care. Inside was everything he needed: snacks, a sketch pad, headphones, and a folded letter from his mom. "Sit by the window and look at the mountains," she'd written. "You'll feel like you're flying over a painting." He kept reading that line again and again. Seattle wasn't home, but it was where he was headed for a 2-week robotics camp his dad had helped sponsor. He was the only kid from his middle school going, and the pride on his mom's face when they dropped him off that morning was still fresh in his mind. Tarek had followed every rule, checked in early, got his gate info, waited in line like everyone else. The gate agent scanned the other passengers through one by one, but when it was his turn, something shifted. She was standing there in a navy blazer, red lipstick that didn't quite match her tone, and that air some people wear when they've decided they're too important to answer basic questions. Her name tag read Colleen Dresner. She glanced at him but not at his pass. "Are you lost?" "No," Tarek said, voice steady. "I'm boarding for Flight 2, 62 to Seattle." She didn't reach for the scanner, didn't look at the monitor, just tilted her head slightly, then said, "Where are your parents?" "I'm flying alone," he replied, pulling out the printed confirmation my dad already boarded earlier. That's when she sighed. One of those long, slow sighs that says more than words. "We don't just let kids wander up here on their own," she said, folding her arms. "I'm not wandering," Tarek said, holding the ticket out again. "It's right here." But instead of taking it, she reached for the paper with 2 fingers, scanned it for all of 3 seconds, and without warning, ripped it clean down the middle. His mouth opened, nothing came out. All he could do was stare at the 2 halves in her hand. "There," she said flatly. "Now you'll wait here until we figure out who you really are. I've seen enough fake passes in my career to know when something doesn't look right." The room seemed to tilt for a second. People in line behind him looked confused. A couple exchanged glances, but no one said anything. Not a word. "I didn't do anything," Tarek muttered, his voice starting to shake. "You're being disruptive now," Colleen snapped. "Don't make this harder on yourself. Disruptive." That word echoed louder than her voice. He looked around, waiting for someone to step in the gate. The passengers, the other staff, even the security officer leaning by the wall. But it was like he'd vanished, like his presence was a problem no one wanted to be responsible for. Colleen waved at a second attendant, a younger guy with a headset. "Can you call someone from TSA? We might have a situation that's..." When the fear started to crawl in, he wasn't scared of flying. He was scared of this being stuck in public, singled out, made small in front of strangers without doing anything wrong. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a dismissal. His fingers closed around the letter from his mom in his jacket pocket. He didn't pull it out. He just held it like a secret. And still, no one moved. But just when it felt like everything around him had decided to ignore what was happening. Someone was watching. The terminal wasn't loud, but it wasn't quiet either. Wheelie bags rolled past, a baby was crying somewhere near the charging station, a businessman tapped at his laptop 2 rows away. All these things kept happening like nothing was wrong. Tarek stood there, still holding the torn edges of his ticket, not sure whether to sit down or stay standing. He hadn't cried, not yet, but his eyes were starting to sting. The younger flight attendant, the one with the headset, looked uncomfortable. His name tag said Ryan, and he kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other like he wanted to say something but didn't. Meanwhile, Colleen stood with her arms crossed, acting like she'd just prevented a major security breach instead of humiliating a 12-year-old in front of strangers. Tarek tried again. "Ma'am, if you just scan my name, my dad's already on the plane. His name is Benson Delancey." That made her pause for a second, a flicker of recognition in her expression, but she buried it fast. "I don't care whose name you throw around," she replied. "I've been doing this job 20 years. I know when something smells off. I didn't lie about anything." "You're being combative now," she said. "You want to make this worse." He didn't answer. Not because he didn't have words, but because he didn't want to give her anything else. To twist the TSA officer finally arrived, a stocky man in his 50s, chewing gum, wearing mirrored sunglasses indoors. He glanced at Tarek, then at Colleen. "What's going on?" "Possible fake ticket. He claims he's flying alone. Doesn't have proper ID, getting smart with staff." The officer raised an eyebrow at Tarek. "You got a guardian here. My dad's on the plane already. Your name, Tarek Delancey." The officer pulled out a tablet and started typing. After a few seconds, he looked back at Colleen. "We got a Delancey on the manifest, 2 of them. Actually looks like Benson Delancey checked in about 30 minutes ago, and the minor was confirmed for UM service." Colleen asked, confused, unaccompanied minor. He said bluntly, "The system's clean. He's legit." Colleen's jaw tightened, but she didn't say much, just stood there, arms still crossed, like the facts were somehow disrespecting her opinion. The TSA officer turned to Tarek. "You all right, kid?" Tarek nodded. He wasn't really, but he wasn't about to say that to this guy. "All good here." The officer muttered, stepping back. "Looks like someone jumped the gun." But Colleen wasn't letting go that easily. Well, he still shouldn't have approached the gate alone. "There are procedures." No, Ryan finally spoke. His voice was low, but clear. "He followed the rules. He even checked in with me at the front desk an hour ago. I verified his ID and everything." Colleen shot him a look that could cut drywall, but Ryan didn't back down. That's when something shifted. Not in the air, but in the way people were watching a woman sitting nearby, probably in her late 30s, spoke up. "I saw him standing there with his ticket. He didn't do anything wrong." Someone else murmured, "Yeah, this doesn't feel right." The spell was cracking slowly. Tarek glanced around, still gripping the remains of his boarding pass. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want a scene. He just wanted someone to look at him and say, "I see what happened, and it wasn't okay." Ryan tapped his earpiece. "We need a supervisor at gate C12 now." Colleen didn't say anything. She just stood stiff lips, pursed, still holding on to whatever pride she had wrapped around her authority. Tarek stepped back, still silent. He was too tired to argue, too shaken to speak. But the silence wasn't crushing anymore. It had turned into something else, an opening. But before anyone could say more or fix what had already been broken, a voice called out from behind the security barrier, calm, direct, and unmistakably in control. The voice cut through the tension without raising its volume. "Is there a reason my son isn't on that plane?" Every head at the gate turned. He wasn't tall in the way people expect power to be, no broad shoulders or booming voice. But Benson Delancey didn't need that. He walked with purpose, shoulders relaxed, chin, steady eyes that didn't dart or flinch. He wore a plain slate gray jacket open over a white button-down, and no one would have guessed what he was worth by looking at him. Except Ryan. His eyes widened instantly. "Mr. Delancey." "Sir, I thought you'd already boarded. I stayed behind to observe Benson. Said, we've had staffing complaints on this route. I wanted to see it for myself." He looked over at Tarek, still clutching the torn ticket. "And it looks like I saw more than I expected." Colleen shifted on her heels. "I wasn't aware you weren't supposed to be." He interrupted politely, not angrily, just enough to let her know he was running the conversation. Now Tarek stepped toward him, finally releasing the breath he'd been holding since the moment his pass was torn. "Dad, you all right, Benson?" asked. Tarek nodded faintly, voice dry. "She said, I had a fake ticket tore up." Benson didn't flinch. He turned to Colleen. "Did you scan his name?" No, I didn't get that far. Did you check the UM list? The tag on his backpack has a barcode that links to his manifest." "I didn't think I needed." "2. You didn't think Benson," said his voice still calm. You assumed Colleen's cheeks flushed, but she didn't move. Ryan stepped in again, voice a little firmer. This time he was checked in properly. I verified the UM status myself. The system flagged no issues. Benson nodded once. Then why was his ticket destroyed? Colleen's mouth opened, then closed. "I'd like a supervisor now," Benson said, still not raising his voice, "and I'd like this entire exchange reviewed on the gate security feed that includes the moment my son was stopped, the conversation you had with him, and the exact time his boarding pass was destroyed." Ryan tapped his headset again, already on it. "Sir, the woman who had spoken up earlier, the one sitting near the gate, rose from her seat and walked over. "I saw the whole thing," she said. "Your son was polite. He said he was flying alone, showed his pass. She didn't even read it." Benson turned to her, offering a slight nod. "Thank you." Colleen's arms fell to her sides. She looked smaller now, still standing tall, but something had buckled under her posture. "I didn't know who he was," she said finally, grasping at some kind of excuse. "That's the problem." Benson replied, "It shouldn't matter who he is." A heavy silence followed, one that didn't need filling. A supervisor appeared moments later, walking briskly, his badge catching the overhead lights. "Mr. Delancey." "Apologies for the delay," he said. "Looking around quickly, we were just informed of the issue. We need a report filed," Benson said. "And I want assurance that my son boards without further interference." "Yes, of course he's cleared to board. We'll issue a new ticket immediately." Tarek said nothing. He was still staring at the scraps of paper in his hand. Benson gently touched his shoulder. "You good to fly?" Tarek nodded again, but his voice was just a whisper. "I just didn't get why she looked at me like that." Benson didn't answer right away. He looked at his son, then back at Colleen. She saw what she wanted to see, not what was there. The supervisor cleared his throat. "Mr. Delancey, would you like us to handle this internally, or I'll file my own report?" He said, "I'm not here for drama. I'm here for accountability." The words hung there for a moment, sharp but not cruel. But even as procedures resumed and apologies were muttered, something deeper had already taken root. This wasn't going to end with a new boarding pass. Tarek stood near the window, now away from the crowd, watching the tarmac, while the gate agent scrambled to reprint his boarding pass. Benson remained at the center of it all, surrounded by people who suddenly remembered how to look busy, but he wasn't letting this moment pass quietly. Colleen had retreated behind the gate desk, pretending to double-check seating charts that didn't need checking. She knew eyes were on her. Now, Benson walked over deliberately, Not angry, just clear. You didn't just tear up a boarding pass, he said calmly. You tore up a moment my son had been looking forward to for weeks. Colleen's hand paused on the keyboard. She didn't look at him. I made a judgment call. No, he replied. You made a judgment. Full stop. She slowly turned toward him, her mouth tightening. Are you accusing me of something? I'm pointing out something that already happened. Benson said, You made a decision about my son the second you saw him before he spoke, before you scanned his name, before you did your job. She crossed her arms again, almost instinctively. I was protecting the integrity of the flight. We are trained to spot inconsistencies, and your inconsistency was what exactly he asked. A child standing in line with a valid ticket quietly waiting his turn. Colleen looked like she wanted to argue, but there was nothing left to defend. The security footage had already been flagged. Ryan had made sure of that. The supervisor stood just a few feet away, listening, not interrupting. You know what the worst part is? Benson continued, you didn't think twice about it. Not until you realized who I was, and even then, you weren't sorry. You were scrambling. Her face flushed again. She glanced at the supervisor, maybe hoping for backup. But he stayed silent. I've spent years building this airline. Benson said, his voice low. Not because I needed to, but because I believed travel could feel fair. Inclusive, like you belonged in the sky no matter what your name was. And today you reminded me just how much further we have to go. Colleen stared at the floor. Benson wasn't done. You thought no one would notice, that no one would care enough to speak up, and most days you're probably right. He gestured to the crowd around them, many of whom had resumed their travel routines. Some were still watching. Others had gone back to their phones and laptops like nothing had happened. That's the danger, Colleen's silence. Not just from you, but from everyone who sees something and chooses to pretend it didn't happen. Her voice cracked just slightly. I didn't mean to, but you did. He said you made my son feel like a threat, a problem to be handled, and no amount of customer service training can undo that. For a second, Colleen looked like she might speak again, but then she stopped, and maybe that was better. Sometimes silence is the only honest thing left. Benson stepped back, giving her space not to save face, but to sit with what she'd done. Ryan walked up beside him. Mr. Delancey, he said quietly, your son's new pass is ready. First class upgrade. No charge. Thank you, Benson said. Not for the upgrade, for speaking up earlier. That took something. Ryan gave a quick nod, then returned to the desk. Tarek rejoined his father, eyes still wide, but steadier now. Do I really have to sit up front, he asked. I kind of like the wing seats better. Benson smiled just a little. We'll trade if you want. The supervisor cleared his throat. Mr. Delancey, I want to personally apologize. This is not what we stand for. I hope not. Benson said, but I'll be watching the supervisor. Nodded eyes, serious. We'll handle it from here. But as they began walking toward the jet bridge, what stuck most wasn't what had been said. It was what hadn't been the silence from those who'd seen and chosen comfort over courage. The jet bridge was narrow, filled with that usual blend of stale air and humming lights, but as Benson and Tarek walked side by side, it felt like stepping into a different kind of pressure, one with consequences waiting on. The other end, inside the plane. The flight crew had already been informed. A woman in her late 40s wearing the same Navy uniform as Colleen, but with warmer eyes and steadier hands, greeted them immediately. Mr. Delancey, she said, we're so sorry about what happened at the gate. Your seats are ready, And, Tarek, if you'd like to visit the cockpit before takeoff, we'd be happy to show you around. Tarek blinked, surprised. Really? She smiled. Really? Captain's a fan of your dad? Benson placed a hand on his son's back. Go on. I'll, be, right here. As Tarek followed the attendant to the front of the plane, Benson watched him with a mixture of pride and something else, an ache deep and familiar. He had grown used to seeing things like this play out, but it never stopped hitting a nerve when it touched his own family. He sat down in seat 2A and pulled out his phone. No corporate emails. Not yet. Instead, he opened a notepad and typed a message to his Chief of Staff gate agent at Sacramento Terminal's C-12 incident involving unaccompanied minor security footage, flagged request internal review, and retraining evaluation. I'll handle the report. This one's personal. He hit send, leaned back and stared out of the window as the jet bridge pulled away back in the terminal. The aftermath had already begun. The supervisor, Dean Rosner, stood near the desk with Ryan now off duty, but lingering nearby. Colleen remained at her post, silent, and still staring at the screen like it would erase the memory of what had happened. Dean spoke quietly. You understand what's coming, right? She didn't look up disciplinary review. At the very least, her jaw tightened. I didn't mean I know what you meant, he said, but meaning something and doing it are two different things. You acted without cause that's documented. You singled out a child, didn't follow protocol, and now there's a fire under us from the top. You've got a file. Now, Colleen, a serious one. She said nothing, but the weight of it was sinking in. Meanwhile, Ryan stood with his arms crossed, not smug, not satisfied, just watching. You could have handled it different, he said. You had the info. The manifest was flagged. You just didn't care. Colleen finally snapped, voice sharp, but low. Don't pretend like you've never missed something. I have, Ryan replied. But I've never shredded a kid's ticket because he didn't look like someone I expected. Dean cut in. All right, that's enough. HR will handle the rest. Ryan took a breath and walked off, not bothering with a goodbye, back on the plane. Tarek returned from the cockpit, smiling just slightly. Dad, they said I could press one of the buttons before we take off. Benson raised an eyebrow. Did you ask what it did first? I'm not trying to launch the cargo door mid-air. Tarek grinned. Benson laughed, and for the first time that day, it felt real. A few minutes later, the flight attendants gave their safety demo. Passengers buckled in. The cabin settled. Tarek turned in his seat. Are you mad at her? Benson paused. No. Why not? Because getting angry is easy, he said. Making sure it never happens again. That's harder. That's where the work is. Tarek leaned back quiet again. She looked at me like, I didn't belong there. I know I didn't like that you're not supposed to. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his mom's note. Creased now from how tightly he'd held it. Still gonna look for the mountains, he mumbled. Benson looked out the window. You'll see them, and a lot more. Just don't ever let someone like her make you question if you belong in the seat. You earned. Tarek nodded, but even as the plane lifted into the sky, Benson knew the conversation wasn't finished, because the system that allowed this to happen wasn't grounded at the gate. It was everywhere, and that was going to take more than one flight to fix. By the time the plane leveled above the clouds, the city behind them looked small, flattened into patches of light and shadow, like the whole world could be zipped into a suitcase and stored in the overhead bin. Tarek leaned toward the window, forehead pressed to the plastic. I think I see snow on the mountains. Benson glanced over. Could be Mount Shasta. Looks like powdered sugar. Tarek said they both chuckled quietly. The tension from the gate hadn't vanished, but in this altitude it felt like they could breathe again. The flight was just under 2 hours, smooth skies, the usual soft rustle of newspapers, headphones clicking on passengers settling into their mid-air rituals. At one point, a different flight attendant, Sharon name stitched in neat cursive, approached with 2 glasses of water and a folded note. This was passed from the gate supervisor before takeoff. She whispered, "He said, 'It's for you.'" Benson unfolded it. "Mr. Delancey, we're reviewing all recent gate interactions across terminals starting tomorrow. I know a formal apology isn't enough, but we'll do better, Dean Rosner." He folded the note, slowly, slid it into his coat pocket across the aisle. An older man, mid-60s, silver buzz cut, worn denim jacket leaned slightly over that. "Your boy?" he asked. Benson turned. "He is. He handled himself real calm back there. Most kids would have lost it. He's been taught not to." The man nodded, then glanced at Tarek. "My grandson's around his age. Kids like him, they got to be twice as patient, huh?" Benson didn't answer right away. Twice as patient, 3 times as careful, and still. Things happen. The man gave a knowing nod, then sat back in his seat. He didn't say another word for the rest of the flight. He didn't need to. Tarek stretched his legs and yawned. "Will they fire her?" "I don't know," Benson replied. "Do you want them to?" "No," he said. "I want them to understand why it matters, why it always mattered. People don't learn when you just erase them. They learn when they're forced to see what they couldn't." Before Tarek looked down at his sketch pad, finally opening it. For the first time since boarding, he started to draw mountains, clouds, a long plane slicing across the sky. "You think she'll remember this?" he asked. "I think it'll follow." Her Benson said good. They didn't talk much for the rest of the flight, but the silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It held something else, understanding maybe, or just the relief of being past the worst part, when they landed in Seattle. The cabin filled with the usual sounds. Seat belts clicking overhead, bins popping open, voices stretching from hours of stillness at the front of the plane. A member of airport staff waited with a small sign that read, "Unaccompanied. Minor Tarek Delancey Protocol," as they exited. Benson placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I'll see you in 2 weeks. You flying out to pick me up? Wouldn't miss it." Tarek grinned and grabbed his bag. Sharon smiled at both of them. "Have a great camp, young man." "Thanks, Tarek," said, then glanced at Benson. Love you too." As he watched his son disappear into the terminal with the escort, Benson felt the full weight of the day settle on his chest. Not in a way that crushed him, but in a way that reminded him why he built this airline in the first place, because flying for some people was just transportation. But for others, it was a battlefield, one where being polite didn't always protect you, where silence let things rot, and where even the skies weren't neutral. But what Benson knew, what he had taught Tarek to believe, was that the right thing doesn't stop being right just because it's inconvenient 2 days after the flight. Benson sat in his office on the 22nd floor of a high-rise in downtown Oakland. The windows behind him gave a wide view of the bay, the bridge stretching in the distant fog, curling like fingers around the skyline. But Benson wasn't looking outside. He was rereading an email, one from Dean Rosner. "Mr. Delancey, Colleen Dresner has been placed on administrative leave pending full review. As per your recommendation, we are launching a system-wide training initiative focused on bias recognition, de-escalation, and youth passenger engagement. I appreciate your restraint and your reminder that accountability is more than punishment. Sincerely, Dean." He closed the message and leaned back in his chair. There wasn't any joy in it, no satisfaction in being right, but there was a quiet steadiness that came from knowing something had shifted. Not everything, but something his assistant knocked and peeked in. "You've got your 2:30 with the legal team and a voicemail from the Sacramento gate rep. She said a woman stopped by asking for a meeting with you. Name, Colleen Dresner." He sighed. "Set it for next week, 10 minutes no longer." "Will do." When she closed the door, Benson reached into his pocket and pulled out Tarek's boarding pass, or what was left of it. He'd kept the torn halves not out of spite, but as a reminder. A real one. Paper thin but heavy with meaning. Later that evening, Tarek called from camp. "They let us build drones today." He said mine flew straight into a tree. Benson chuckled. "At least it took off. Yeah, I'll send you a picture when I get it out of the branches. How's everything else?" Tarek paused. "Good. But guess what?" "What?" "There's this other kid from Texas. He asked me what I want to be when I grow up." I told him. "I don't know. He said you look like you're going to run stuff one day." Benson smiled. "He's not wrong. I didn't feel like that at the airport," I know Benson said softly, "but one day maybe someone will see you, and instead of making assumptions, they'll remember your name, not because of what I built, because of who you are." Tarek didn't respond right away. "I drew her by the way." He said eventually, "Who, the woman from the gate?" "I drew her face. Not mean or anything, just regular. I put her behind a desk and wrote the words, 'Do better' on the glass window." Benson let that land. "That's a good drawing, yeah. I think I'll keep it." They said their good nights, and the call ended. Benson sat quietly in the dark office for a moment longer. What happened at that gate wasn't rare. That was the part. Most people didn't understand. It wasn't a shock. It was a pattern. But patterns can be broken not with noise, with action, with naming things, when it's easier to let them slide, with raising a son who knew how to stay composed when the ground shifted beneath him. Not everyone has the luxury of a father in the first-class lounge ready to step in, and that's why silence can't be an option. Not at airports, not at school, not anywhere. So if you're watching this right now and thinking, "I've seen something like this happen," or "I've been Tarek," or even "I've been quiet when I shouldn't have been," you're not alone. And that's the lesson here. Silence doesn't protect, it permits. And when people finally speak, really speak, systems start to shift. If this story moved, you share it. Not for views, for awareness, for accountability, and for every kid who's just trying to get to their seat without being treated like a problem. Subscribe if you believe. Respect should never depend on recognition, and next time you see something that doesn't sit right, don't look away. Say something.